I got railed this morning by the SAT. Not a pleasurable experience. -3 out of 10. Would not recommend. But that's alright. We're going to bounce back. We'll do better next time. I don't even know what I got, but I know it's bad. Something that's been brought to my attention is that Sloan Price is getting very close to 1 million followers on TikTok. So if you guys could do me a favor and go unfollow her, because she's getting way too close to 1 million, and I don't like seeing other people succeed. I need to get to 1 million first. We're closing the gap. It's really close. Fingers crossed, guys. I'd also like to thank Elliot Hill for her contribution to this video. This is your Santa hat. I siphoned it from Presley Davis's car like a year ago, and it's just been at my house. So if you want it, just let me know. But thank you to your contribution to this video. Everything else is just like normal. Learning targets, filled out learning targets, practice test, the key, my free history newsletter if you want to learn about interesting history, all that stuff down in the description. Thank you, Connor Kramer. He helped out again. And yeah, should be a pretty easy unit. Hopefully a relatively short video. It's the last test before the semester. I bet Mrs. Cluck and Mr. Scott will make it fairly easy. And I would recommend that all of you guys take this semester final. Mrs. Cluck said that it's going to be really easy, so I anticipate it will be very easy. They came out with a study guide. I'll make a video over the study guide. We'll have that. It'll be great. Would recommend taking it. Use your exemption on something more worthwhile. And let's get ready. Alright, these learning targets are only about 2.5 pages unfilled, so I'll try to blow through them as fast as I can. Starting with transcontinental railroads and the national market. Long story short, they built the transcontinental railroad. You can put your stuff on a train and get it anywhere in America, which changes the game totally, because it used to be all of these regional sellers in all of these regional markets because they couldn't get their product all the way across America. But now that the Transcontinental Railroad is open, you have these regional sellers who are now able to reach everyone in America. So there's kind of like this mad frenzy to try to dominate America. Like if I'm the brick seller from North Carolina, all of a sudden I can put my bricks on a train and sell them to a guy in California. So I need to build my business to take into account the new market, like the exponential growth of the market. So you see big growth of businesses, technological advancements. This is things like the telephone, the light bulb, the typewriter, things that help with communication, manufacturing, just quality of life in general. All of this stuff kind of tends to go up. Business consolidation. So this was the practice of being business consolidation and trust are super similar. It's like, oh, I'm the brick guy from North Carolina, that's the brick guy from Kentucky, and that's the brick guy from Georgia, and we want to sell bricks to everyone in America. Let's combine our businesses so that we have more capital and we can sell easier for cheaper. Sometimes they would fail because the different companies that merge together would try to go off and do their own thing to make more profit than their other trustees or business consolidatees. But sometimes they would work out really successfully, like Standard Oil. I mean, this isn't business consolidation per se, but Rockefeller just bought out all of his competition, merging their companies with his company, and either shutting them down or making them a part of the Rockefeller Standard Oil process. And this is what allowed him to create a monopoly, how he got enough capital to create enough oil to sell to all the people. It was through business consolidation. So that is what creates these massive monopolies like Standard Oil or Carnegie Steel. Trusts are super similar. They're just a legal arrangement where companies would come together and they'd be managed by a single director to reduce competition, but they would often fail because they were off doing their own thing secretly to try to make extra money. And that didn't really work. And then vertical integration. If you loved human geography and you have a good memory, you might remember this. This is where you control every aspect of every phase of production. So raw materials, manufacturing, selling, and distributing. So if I'm making cars, I'm mining the steel, or I'm mining the iron. I'm turning the iron into steel. I'm manufacturing the car. I'm selling and distributing the car. So that's vertical integration. Andrew Carnegie is known for vertical integration. He did that in the steel company. He would mine the steel, he'd turn it into steel, he'd make buildings out of steel, he'd sell and distribute the steel, and he got super rich, which led to the Gospel of Wealth. If you need more explanation about Andrew Carnegie, we watched a 50-minute movie in class. I pray for you. But the Gospel of Wealth is he had a bunch of money and he was like, I'm going to be a good guy and give it all away because I don't need $120 billion. And so yeah, he gave back. He started off poor, so he gave it back to poorer regions so they could get educated through these little libraries that are still scattered across America today. And I don't like the way that they did this because John D. Rockefeller is like the vertical integrator. I don't know why he's under horizontal integration, but horizontal integration is when you completely own one phase of production. So instead of like owning all four phases of production for your company, you own all of one phase of production for everyone's company. So everyone, like say you own every single copper mine in America. If someone wants to make steel or use something with iron, they have to buy from you. That's what horizontal integration is. Rockefeller did that a little bit because he completely controlled the process of oil refinement, but both Carnegie and Rockefeller are most known for vertical integration. Again, if you don't know who John D. Rockefeller is at this point, I don't know what to tell you. He's the Standard Oil guy, pretty humble. He recognized the profit he could make from oil refinement, and slowly and surely was able to make his way up the ladder through deals with Cornelius Vanderbilt, and then being able to buy out his competitors and create the massive monopoly that is Standard Oil. Yeah, he was a ruthless guy, opposed labor unions, really put down the fist, but he made some bread. The robber barons, these are just like the rich guys like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Tom Scott before he lost everything, and like the people who profited all the money out of these businesses. They're considered like basically thieves, unscrupulous exploitation, and so that's who the robber barons are. I might have said red barons. That's a World War I pilot. Robber barons, think Rockefeller, think Carnegie, think Vanderbilt, think all those rich guys. Growing disparity between the rich and the poor. This is pretty simple. I mean, the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. The top 1% was making about half of America's income, while the other 99% of America was making the other half of America's income. So the wealth disparity was huge. It was really bad. So that's what was happening then. They've tweaked a few things, and now it's a little bit different now, thank goodness. But yeah. All right, now let's talk about some economic and some social stuff on the frontier, starting with Frederick Jackson Turner, who was a historian back then, and he argued that for this thing like the significance of the frontier in American history, or whatever, I guess it's like his book or something. But his point was basically the frontier was a place where people from the East could escape to if their life went bad. Like, say I was living my life in New York and something went wrong, I could just go to the frontier and basically start anew. And he believes that that was the purpose of the frontier, for people who had their lives ruined in the East could go to this safety valve up in the West. And yeah, they could still get all the freedom, democracy out there, and maybe try to make a little more money, live a little more independently. The Morial Land Grant Act. So this was a land grant act that was passed in Congress during the Civil War, and it provided federal land to states to establish public universities, which promoted like higher education, more education, and they focused especially on agriculture and mechanical arts. A&M, Texas, agriculture and mechanical arts. That's crazy. It's almost like it comes from the Morial Land Act. And then the Bonzana farms. So these were just big farms in like the West, like in the middle of nowhere, and they just had these big farms, and they'd make food on the farms. They mainly were focused towards irrigated crops, which family farms normally weren't, but they were like these big, almost sort of like corporate farms out in the West. And then Cattle Kingdom. This is like cowboys. They would like take cows from Texas, bring them to Kansas to the railroads. But it was actually kind of a rough life being a cowboy. They'd make almost no money, and then people started putting up barbed wire fences. The winters got rough, and we kind of see the cowboy die out, and that's when fenced ranches become a thing. The mining frontier. This is what kind of led to the rise of large corporations like Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel, was the lucrative minerals that we had. This created a huge mining towns like Butte that we watched in the video, and Leadville, and often the working conditions in the mines were terrible. Most of these were in like the West Rocky Mountains, but yeah, life wasn't great in these mines by any means, but that was what was popping on the mining frontier. Chinese immigration. all the Chinese people were like, oh, I can make a lot of money in America. Let me head on over there. And so by 1880, there were 105,000 Chinese people living in America, mainly by California. They would build railroads, they would mine, they would do labor jobs to make more money than they would in China. But then everyone in America were like, why are all these Chinese people taking our jobs? And the anti-Chinese sentiment grew and built up and eventually ended in exclusionary laws. That's some foreshadowing. Subjugation of the Plains Indians. So these were just the Indians who were left over living in the Great Plains. If you remember from Unit 1, that's like North Dakota, South Dakota, that area. They hunted like buffalo, and then all the white settlers pulled up and they're like, I'm going to live here now. And the Indians were kind of forced to move. Military campaigns by this guy, Philip H. Sheridan. He was a U.S. general, and he just walked around destroying all the native villages that he could find, subjugating all the Indians to make space for the white settlers to move in. Chief Joseph, this was a Native American chief, and his tribe was forced to relocate from Oregon, and they had to make the 1,700-mile long journey to Canada while they were being chased by the U.S. Army. But the U.S. Army caught up, and he had to surrender, and they forced him to relocate to Oklahoma. And this is before Oklahoma was opened up. This was in 1879. He went to Washington to give a speech to ask for equal rights for his people, but he was rejected. The Battle of Little Bighorn. This is General Custer and Sitting Bull. So some of you might, it's moderately famous, but General Custer and his 250 men were defeated by the Cheyenne warriors in Sitting Bull. I mean, of course, later the America comes and whoops them, but the Cheyenne people were promised this piece of territory, and then the Americans found out that there was actually gold on the territory that they gave them, so they tried to kick him out, and the Cheyenne didn't want to leave, and so they fought. But the Battle of Little Bighorn was a Native victory. It was not long lasted, but it was a victory nonetheless. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, this was just the government department that was responsible for all the policies aimed at assimilating Native Americans into white culture. It established boarding schools where Native American children would leave their families and go try to like integrate into white society. They'd wear white clothes. They'd be given new names, educated in like the white sort of European style to try to like assimilate the Native Americans into white culture. And then there was the Dawes Act. This was aimed to break up tribal land, and instead of like being like this tribe owns this land, it'd be like this family owns this part of land, more in the style that it was normally, like your family owns this farm and then that family owns that farm. They were trying to split it up instead of just one tribe owning a huge sect of land. But really, under the skin, it was the settlers trying to take more land for themselves. The Indians would always lose land in the Dawes Act by splitting it up. So it benefited whites. It culturally eroded the natives. The ghost dance. So apparently, like a Messiah, if you guys remember from the video, a Messiah or a promise of a Messiah came if you hit the ghost dance. Then you were like invulnerable to bullets, and then the Messiah would come and like defeat the white people, and the buffalo would come back. But anyway, it sort of started a cultural revival. You know, the natives started hitting the ghost dance, and then all the white people were like, "What in the world are they doing?" So, some American soldiers walked down and just started shooting the place up. They saw some people hitting the ghost dance, and they're like, "Ra-ta-ta-ta." And they killed like 200 Native Americans. Sitting Bull was killed by his own people. And yeah, that was that. Actually, when it happened, everyone in America thought it was awesome. Actually, some of the people got a Medal of Honor who were a part of the Americans who were a part of the massacre. So this was just kind of like the breaking of resistance, specifically in South Dakota, but it showed sort of a regional collapse of any sort of Native American power. And this was kind of the moment when Americans took control of the entire continent, barring Oklahoma, which opens up a little bit later. All right, now let's move into the political corruption of the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age in general was just the period in America between 1870 and 1890, and it was marked by great economic growth, huge political corruption and government inefficiency, huge social inequality, huge economic inequality, corporate powers dominated politics, etc., excessive scandals that we will talk about right here. So these few things right below me are in the context of the AP exam, they aren't going to ask you what is the tweed ring, right? These aren't going to be like multiple choice questions. Instead, the point of these are to be used as outside evidence. You'll probably, maybe an LEQ prompt would be like, explain why the government was inefficient during the Gilded Age or whatever. Explain, was the government efficient during the Gilded Age? And you would say, like, no. Example, outside evidence, tweed ring, credit mobilier scandal. That's the purpose of these terms in the AP curriculum. So don't get too worked up about trying to remember every single little thing, every single little court case. They're probably, at least on the AP exam, they're not going to ask you targeted questions about specific things. For our tests at Westlake, they will, because it's over a more condensed period. But just don't stress over these for the AP exam. The tweed ring, so this was like a corrupt political machine, like a business in New York that would be given money by the federal government, and they would basically just steal it. Or I guess by the New York government. They'd be like, hey, I'll build you this courthouse for $5 million, even though it really only cost $1 million to build a courthouse. And then they'd pocket the other $4 million, and sometimes they'd give some money out as welfare to poorer people to gain their support. And eventually it was sniffed out. And the guy, Boss Tweed, who ran it, this thing is also known as Tammany Hall, so if you see that, it's the same thing. Boss Tweed, he fled to Cuba and then to Spain, where he was just thrown back in prison, and then he died. So that was an amazing life. But yeah, this is just another form of corruption in the government. They would just steal government money and pocket it. Same with the credit mobilier scandal. They were like, hey, bro, I have a railroad company that totally exists. Give me $80 million and I'll build you a railroad in North Dakota. And the government was like, no. And they're like, what if I give you some money? And then you can say yes. I'll just slide you a couple 20s. And then all of a sudden Congress voted yes. Wow, it was amazing. And so, maybe they spent a few dollars making like half a railroad or something, and then they just pocketed the rest of it. They gave a little bit back to Congress for passing it. This just like shows the state of politics during the Gilded Age. The credit mobilier scandal really does a great job of that. Super corrupt. You could bribe basically anyone. It was just after own personal gain. That's all politics was, which led to a huge political stalemate. You often saw one-term presidencies because people weren't really content with the way government was, and no one was really changing anything. It had a high voter turnout, but like people weren't really loyal to their parties. They would flip-flop a lot based on the way their life was at the time. Moving on to, politics was terrible during the Gilded Age. It was all bad. The gold standard. In 1879, the U.S. returned to the gold standard, meaning that like you could trade in $100 for $100 worth of gold, and vice versa. This just backed all U.S. currency by gold, which was good for bankers and such, because then their loans could be, and like the dollar itself could be like sort of insured by gold and backed by gold. But it was worse for the poor working class, like farmers and laborers, because it meant that there was only a limited amount of money in circulation, because every dollar that was in circulation had to be backed by gold, which limited the amount of money that could really be out there, and it increased the influence of banks because they had more control over the money that was in circulation. And then the Civil Service Act. If you remember from WAP, this is a lot like civil service exams. This is America, is that like bringing forth a meritocracy element to its government, saying, hey, for these positions, instead of being appointed by corrupt government officials, you are just going to take an exam, and based on how you do, you will get, that will decide what position you get. So it's sort of it was an attempt to make the government less corrupt, more efficient, more meritocracy. Initially, it only applied to 10% of the jobs, but that grew higher as time went on. The Interstate Commerce Commission. So the Interstate Commerce Commission and the Sherman Antitrust Act, which are right below it, were both things targeted at breaking up monopolies, and both of them didn't really work out. So the Interstate Commerce Commission aimed to regulate railroad practices by ensuring reasonable rates, because like if I were a farmer and I lived out in North Dakota and you were the only railroad for 300 miles, you could charge me whatever you wanted because I don't have anywhere else to go. And the Interstate Commerce Commission was trying to crack down on that to make sure that even if you were the only option, you would still give a reasonable rate. Otherwise, it'd be too expensive for farmers to sell their stuff. The Sherman Antitrust Act aimed to prevent monopolies and practices. They wanted to restrict free trade to sort of lessen price gouging. Again, it didn't really work out. Courts would often actually use the Sherman Antitrust Act to suppress labor unions instead of attacking monopolies, which is its purpose. So both the ICC and the Sherman Antitrust Act were targeted at monopolies but didn't really work out. And then there was the Grange. This was a farmers' organization that aimed to address the issues caused by railroad price gouging because it was super expensive, high rates, high fees, and they created this organization that eventually grew to 700,000 members in the mid-1870s, and they were successfully able to lobby their local government and the federal government into mandating restrictions on price gouging so the farmers could more cheaply move their grain and such. Same thing with miners, their ore, their grain, to the cities, to the manufacturing areas, so they could make a little bit more money, take a little bit more from the monopolies. Now, if you took AP World History, you likely remember social Darwinism, which was just applying Darwin's theory of evolution and survival of the fittest to society. The way we see this in the Gilded Age is in two primary ways. First, racial. I'm white, I'm European, I'm more civilized than Native Americans or more than blacks, whatnot. And it was kind of a I'm better than these other races because I'm more civilized. That's like the typical way that social Darwinism has been used throughout history, but in the Gilded Age, it's primarily more of an economic inequality thing where you're thinking, I'm rich, these people are poor, I worked harder, I'm more deserving of this wealth, poor people got what they deserve, etc., etc. I'm the fittest, I deserve to be rich, I'm the best, poor people deserve nothing. This is perfectly summed up by this guy, William Graham Sumner, who was a social Darwinist and rich and white during the Gilded Age, and he believed that freedom was the right to control property without government interference, and he argued that inequality should be accepted by society. Basically, he was just saying, hey, I'm better than some of you guys, and you just have to deal with it. If you're black, I'm better than you. If you're poor, I'm better than you. If you're Native American, I'm better than you. I'm better than you because I'm rich and I'm civilized, so clearly I'm just better than you. I deserve wealth, and you do not. So that just kind of shows what was happening in that time. And then liberty of contract. This is important. This is how monopolies were able to exploit their workers. It's on the surface, it seems like it'd be good for workers, but it really gets taken advantage of. It's the principle to emphasize the freedom of the individual to make contract with an employer. So if I'm going to work at a gas station, the gas station employer and I will agree on a contract saying the most amount of hours I can work a week is X. The amount I will get paid this much. These are the working conditions, etc., etc., etc. On the surface, this seems like it'd be good, but when you're dealing with monopolies, that means there's only one place to work, so they can make the contract whatever they wanted. They're like, all right, first day on the job, you're going to be working 70 hours at 10 cents an hour in the middle of a furnace, and you have no other choice but to agree. So they were able to bypass sort of state regulations and like workplace like basic rights and just use liberty of contract to say, no, look, they agree to working 70 hours a week at this terrible wage and terrible working conditions. We see this in United States versus E.C. Knight and Lochner versus New York. Both of these cases will be, the way you'll see these cases is they're both being used to show that liberty of contract was being abused by monopolies to exploit their workers. United States versus E.C. Knight, this was a Supreme Court ruling that ruled that the Sherman Antitrust Act, which aimed to break like U.S. monopolies, could not be applied to the sugar refining monopoly. The court determined that the U.S. Constitution granted Congress the power to regulate commerce but not manufacturing, thus limiting the federal control over business practices. So people were making sugar and they were treating their employees terribly, and they had a total monopoly, but the Supreme Court found that the U.S. government could not regulate the manufacturing process. They could only regulate the commerce and the distribution process. So that's what E.C. Knight did. And then Lochner versus New York was a Supreme Court case that struck down a state law limiting bakers' work hours. And I think it was New York, I don't know. Bakers were limited to working 10 hours a day or 60 hours per week. And then these big corporations came up and they're like, no, look, they signed the contract right here saying that they want to work 70 hours per week. By liberty of contract, they should be allowed to work for however many hours we both agree upon, even if it's really terrible wages and terrible conditions. And the Supreme Court sided with the big corporations and decided that to remove all restrictions. So people could be working for however many hours the monopolies wanted them to, for whatever wage the corporations wanted them to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was really bad for working place rights, working place safety, pay, long hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was a bad time to be a laborer in the United States of America. And here we are at the end. I cannot scroll down any further. Look, you know that the unit is so boring. They didn't even put any DEI in here. Like it's such a boring unit that wasn't even worth filling it with random DEI crap. But we'll finish this up and we can get on with our lives because this unit is terrible. The Great Railroad Strike. So this happened in 1877, and this was like the first national labor walkout or first big strike that was sparked by wage cuts by these big monopolies, and all the workers just left. And then the rail traffic all across the country started to fall apart, and militia forces fired on strikers in Pittsburgh, and then the protests escalated into riots, and the riots led to property destruction, and Rutherford B. Hayes was like, oh, okay, and he ordered federal troops to suppress the strike, marking a shift in government action from protecting former slaves and protecting laborers to protecting property rights of the big monopolies. The Knights of Labor, so this... The Knights of Labor was a large labor organization that aimed to unite skilled and unskilled workers, including Asian immigrants or any sort of immigrants. At its peak, it had nearly 800,000 members and it engaged in strikes, boycotts, political action, social reforms. So what you need to know about the Knights of Labor, they were basically like a workers' rights movement, and yeah. They advocated for labor reforms, and they challenged the idea of social Darwinism. They said that is wrong, and turns out they're on the right side of history. So congratulations to them. Terrence V. Powderly, which is not a court case, apparently. Terrence V. Powderly, that's just his name actually. He was the leader of the Knights of Labor in the 1880s, and he believed that Americans were not truly free due to the economic inequality pushed on them by the big monopolies, and to be frank, he's probably right, and the political corruption of the era. Powderly advocated for significant social change, included the establishment of economic rights for all Americans, protection from big monopoly, oppression, etc., etc., etc. Progress and Poverty by Henry George. So that was a book, I hope, and it addressed a growing inequality amid the economic progress. Like, we're making a lot of money in America, but yet the people are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. He argued that land should be common property and redefined freedom not as ownership, but as collective societal rights. So this is sort of more towards socialism. His ideas didn't actually have any effect on real policy, but they did kind of spark the thinking of moving more towards a liberal government. And it influenced movements focused on economic reform in the future. The single tax. So this was a tax proposed by Henry George, the guy above, that would replace all other taxes with an increase in the value of real estate. The tax would be high enough to prevent any land speculation and ensure that the land became a common resource for society, basically trying to target people who own massive amounts of land with super high property tax. That way everyone would they'd have to sell their land, and it'd be everyone would own an equal amount of land to help address economic inequality and social distress. And then there's the Cooperative Commonwealth by Lawrence Gronlund. I don't know why I can't speak. It's 12:57. We're so close. We can do it. And this was the first book to introduce truly socialist ideas to an American audience. Gronlund was a Danish immigrant, and he argued that private control of economic enterprises should be replaced by government ownership. So saying instead of John D. Rockefeller owning Standard Oil, the government should own Standard Oil. And this is socialism. Unlike Karl Marx, though, he believed that socialism would evolve through peaceful evolution, making it more acceptable to middle-class Americans instead of violence. And then, man, there's so many books on here. And then there's Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy. I don't know what my voice just did. And this was a utopian novel where the protagonist wakes up in the year 2000. Oh my goodness. To find a society where strife and competition have been replaced by cooperation. Spoiler alert, that did not happen. but the book offered a vision of keeping capitalism's material abundance while eliminating the inequality part of it, which it's a trade-off, right? If inequality is high, the money is going to be high, but if the inequality is low, then the money is going to be low. So it's just kind of like, where do you want the scale? But Looking Backward was a utopian novel where the dream of where it could be no equality and all the money, which isn't really realistic. And a proposed state guaranteed economic security for all, so socialism slash communism. And then the Bible Belt, this is just the southern states, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia. They became closely tied to religious principles, and that affected their political voting patterns. They had previously opposed federal regulation campaign. Then they changed and campaigned to outlaw behaviors seen as sinful, such as like alcohol consumption, gambling, and prostitution. So previously they thought government should not interfere with anything, and now they're thinking actually these sinful things like alcohol consumption, gambling, prostitution, they should be made federally illegal. The social gospel movement. This emphasized that the true freedom and spiritual growth required addressing social inequalities, and it's basically like the Bible, but for like social equality. It advocated for wealth redistribution, better working conditions, more cooperative economy, opposing like the competitive capitalism oppression. The movement focused on improving urban poverty because most of the laborers lived in big cities. It aimed at reducing child labor because that was a big issue. Housing, worked alongside groups like the Knights of Labor. Again, pretty socialist. And then the Haymarket Affair. So the Haymarket Affair followed a very violent strike at the McCormick plant. The police killed 4 strikers. A rally was organized the next day in Haymarket Square to protest the killings of the 4 workers, and during the rally, an unknown person threw a bomb into the crowd, killing a policeman, which led to the police opening fire, killing several bystanders and officers. In the aftermath, 8 anarchists, like strikers, were arrested and convicted for the bombing. Despite the weak evidence, they needed to throw someone in jail for it, and they did. And then this whole affair fueled anti-labor sentiment in government. They're like, oh, they're going to take it. It was like the same thing with the slaves. Whenever the slaves did the uprising in Virginia, went hard on the slave laws, the same thing happened here. The laborers rose up in a strike, and they're like, oh my goodness, they're going to try to take over. And so the government kind of put the fist down. And it was super harsh on immigrant labor because they were seen as not American. So, all right, we did it. This should hopefully be a pretty easy test. Would recommend you take the final. Thanks for sticking with it. Yeah, good luck, everyone. You guys got this. See you later.